Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's weekly live stream. This week is going to be fun, a little bit different, having a conversation. And I'll actually let's just jump right in. I'll introduce my guest who's joining me, and then we'll kind of talk about how I kind of thought of this issue or this topic and kind of where we're going to be going. So actually joining me, good friend, good buddy of mine, Kevin. Kevin, thanks for coming on.
Hey Ryan, thanks for inviting me on the show.
Yeah,
Honored to finally be a part of your live stream and podcast.
I
This is
know,
cool.
absolutely. So Kevin, man, we go back. I keep forgetting so I first met Kevin when he hosted a Sean McDowell, Ryan Bell,
Yes,
Ryan Bell
right.
debate, not Rob Bell,
Yeah.
Ryan Bell debate at his church. And I think he said something to the effect of during that debate that his high school students planned it or set it up or organized it or something to that effect.
Yeah,
And I
they
went,
were a part of the team to put everything together.
yeah, and I had just moved to California, and I was just getting into the apologetics world. Sean McDowell was one of my professors, and when I found that, me doing high school ministry, teaching high school, and doing student apologetics, that he had his students organize and kind of put together a debate between Ryan Bell and Sean McDowell, I thought, I have to get to know this guy. And so I went straight up afterwards. I think Kevin was the first person I met. And so since then, we've worked together a lot. An incredible
Yes.
youth pastor. Very wise youth pastor. I think you do things very well. I
Thanks.
put you at the top. I'll brag on you for a second, right? I can say what I want, right? I put you at the top of youth pastors who I think do it well and really know how to lead and train students. And so I'm grateful for you to come on and join us and hopefully help the rest of us learn a few things, maybe about youth ministry if you have questions, theology, students, but also our topic. So let me just kind of explain where we're going to be going today for all of you watching as I just kind of ramble on here. But we're obviously dealing with a very different time that we're living in right now. That's no shock, as we're in quarantine and self-isolation and social distancing and everything that's going on. And I come on the show previously actually talking about distractions and how we often are just distracting ourselves. I did a short video on that, and then I barely talked about it a little bit in my live stream, I think it was last week, about, how do we actually pursue noble ends, right? How do we continue pursuing knowledge? How do we continue doing what God has created us to do rather than simply distracting ourselves with more kind of noise during this time? And it was about that time that I actually saw Kevin posted online that youth pastors, or he's part of a kind of a youth ministry organization or maybe a group, messaging group, I guess, and that they were just kind of posting games to distract students, to kind of take students' minds off of what was happening and not really dealing with the core issues of the disappointments that everyone is facing, but especially here students of seniors maybe not being able to graduate if they've worked for 12 years for this and maybe not being able to walk at their graduation, or athletes who are having their seasons canceled, and how do we actually help students deal with the difficulties and disappointments? But this even goes further, because it's not just students, right? It's, weddings I hear being postponed, and, it sounds minor, but I had a bike race that was canceled, and I have, baseball games that I usually umpire that are postponed and canceled. And so we're all dealing with this, and, maybe the excitement of NHL postseason or NBA postseason and these things that we're looking forward to. So, Kevin, let's kind of just mention here really quick, what was it that initially kind of got your attention? Of what were you seeing happening with students, kind of people trying to maybe distract students versus dealing with the disappointments?
Yeah, I think it's more of an instinctual thing. I think what I was personally reacting to was the fact that we had so many youth pastors who instinctively the first thing they wanted to do was just to help students fill in their time in terms of their boredom. Because the truth is, they're not going to school physically. They have to be on online school. They just have a lot more time. And I just thought it was a little tragic that a lot of people wanted to initially go and fill in that space of like, how do we make sure that the kids are connected and they have fun? That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think I was just a little frustrated that tended to be the initial place that a lot of people went to versus really thinking about what the implications for all of this was. Yeah. Now, granted, and I think I've learned over the last couple of days that like different parts of the country were dealing with this on different levels. Yeah. And I think because we're both from Southern California, things for us escalated a lot faster. And so for us in Southern California, I think it was clear that this is going to be a massive issue. It's probably going to cause a lot of the things that we were planning late in the spring, potentially even the rest of the school year, to be canceled. And I think we knew that a little faster than a lot of other different parts of the country, who maybe were taking this a little bit lighter and were thinking that maybe students would be back in school by like mid-April or something like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's still stuff that was being canceled. There was the potential anyway of disappointing things like, again, not being able to go to graduation, not being able to have a graduation. And this doesn't just go for high school students. This is for college students as well. Having to like move back home, having the semester cut off, all those things that you were anticipating, all the things that you need to have closure to certain parts of your life. The fact that they're not going to have those things. If I'm honest, like our instinct to like fill their time with games and stuff, I don't think is necessarily the best way to help them deal with it. We need to talk about those disappointments and be a landing place and a safe place for them to talk about those issues.
Yeah. And I mean, just the other night, I was spending time with some friends over Zoom, doing games over Zoom, having fun with friends. And one of them is about to graduate with his doctorate of dentistry. He's about to graduate dental school, and he was just informed that his graduation is not going to happen, that they can return their cap and gowns. And it's like, obviously, he's still going to be able to get his degree and practice dentistry and do what he desires to do. But the idea of the sweat and tears, the blood, sweat, and tears, and the time he has poured into his studies and the hard work that he's put into dental school, and to not kind of receive that congratulations, kind of that pat on the back, the job well done that sometimes we work so hard for. It was a sad thing for him. And I know that is for so many others, as my high school students, and what you said is we didn't really know what to expect. And when I first went into our break, right, we were told you're going to do online school for 2 weeks and then take spring break. It was like, okay, that'll give us 3 weeks away from campus. I'm going to put my hope in the fact that we're going to return at the beginning of April after spring break. And so I even told students, hey, I'm going to kind of teach in a way that we will be back in the class after spring break, hoping that's true, but obviously preparing as if it weren't. And yeah, we were just told we're not going back till May. And so I shifted things around, and my students are now asking me, are we going to have graduation? Are we going to do it online? Are we going to get our diplomas? How's this going to work? And so that's definitely something that like we have to think about as we deal with that. And so that's why I wanted you to come on. And so as people maybe are coming in and joining the conversations, is just to have a conversation and talk through some of the issues that we see are happening in ways that we can kind of come along and really help students deal with these disappointments that they're struggling with.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to think through is that this is only going to get worse as this gets longer. Yeah. It's not going to get any easier to deal with this stuff. And like, for example, I think the UCs, some of them have already announced that they're not going to have their commencement ceremonies. And so students have been signing petitions online to get them to do something because, again, they want that closure. Yeah. So how do we talk to our students about that? What are the strategies that we can have to have our students pray through those disappointments, walk through those disappointments? And I think our job as youth pastors is to create those spaces. And so I think that's what I've been advocating for. Is I think it's great that we can play games on Zoom. I think there's a lot of fun things that are available for sure. And we do need that. I'm not saying that we don't have any sense of humor about anything that's happening, but ultimately in the end, there is a very, very serious wave of disappointment that's coming. And are we preparing ourselves to be able to sit down and have conversations with students who are now asking really big, important questions? Because it's not like this is the only disappointing thing in their life. Yeah. I'm sure that there's going to be things that come in front of them that are going to be even more disappointing than this. More hardship, more pain, more suffering. And the fact that you have a captive audience that wants to know, like, how do I find meaning in my life when I'm not able to have these kinds of things, those kinds of disappointments that stack up. And of course, it's relative. It's not the end of the world that you can't walk down, a stage with your cap and gown, but it is a meaningful thing to the students, and it's a very personal thing too. Yeah. So how do we do that? How do we create spaces for us to engage with our students on that level? And we have to lead in that too. I think you will have students that want to contact you to talk about it. There are those students who want to talk about it and share about the feelings that they're going through. But I think for most students, that it takes a little bit of digging, especially because they don't know how long this is going to last. Yeah. And when you deal with disappointment, and we can use the word grief, there's a couple of different stages that you go through. And I think it's important for us to kind of draw those things out of the students and help them realize that it's okay that you're discouraged and disappointed in this stuff. Some of the students I've been talking to have been feeling a little guilty because they're like, in the grand scheme of things, like me graduating is not as bad as someone getting the actual COVID-19 virus, and maybe, or like their family member or their grandma or grandpa getting it and actually like maybe having to deal with like death or something like that. And so they like don't know how to deal with that because they are grieving in some way, shape, or form, but it's not as serious as, say, someone that's going through something where they actually have the disease.
Well, and I think sometimes that is almost, that's almost, that's sad to me, because I think there are times where it's almost diminishing the actual emotions and the things that they're going through. Yeah. Right. And so they are struggling. There are psychological things that are taking place where there's anxiety, where there's maybe depression or just disappointment and true grief, where, look, what you desire is good in a sense. Like, it's not bad to want these things. And then to almost, I don't know, maybe immediately just kind of dismiss it and go, well, it's not as bad as them, so just kind of ignore it, sweep it under the rug.
Right.
Rather than saying, there's different levels of everything that's going through, and people are losing their jobs, and maybe that is more serious than just, my bike race being canceled. But still, like, if that is something that we hold close to us, that's going to affect us. And if it's not dealt with, if it's not talked about, if we're not allowing them to process through these things, then who knows, where that may lead, and how we can really build those relationships in that time.
Yeah. So I think it bears on us to think through like our understanding of emotions. Yeah. Like, what is our theology of emotions? What is it that we understand about how God uses emotions? And there is a great opportunity, I think, for youth workers, youth pastors, student pastors to pause and take some time to process these things with students. And it's universal. Like, everyone will understand why we're doing it. It's not because there's one particular person that's hurting in our youth ministries or one particular student that's hurting, but it really is like sort of this collective grief that we're going through. And I think there's such opportunities to, again, provide spaces, provide good teaching, and really be personable with the students with regards to extending that bridge and being a safe place for them to share those things.
Yeah.
And that helps us to be like Christ to that particular community as we reach out to address their needs and the things that they're going through emotionally.
Yeah.
And you're right, like, to say and make it okay to tell them that, it's okay that you don't have everything together, or that you feel a little bit guilty about this. But at the same time, this is something that we have to process through. So like, I've been doing Zoom calls with students, and basically having the Zoom calls essentially be spaces for prayer. And so I'm having like the various small groups meet together, and then we will have one person share a particular prayer request, or just share a particular frustration, or just particularly something they're grieving over. And then we'll have somebody else who's on the Zoom call actually pray for them. And then I'll pray for them. And so the idea is everyone receives prayer, everyone's able to share something, and they're collectively doing this for each other. So there's actually an opportunity for them to also be trained a little bit in terms of like, how do you pray for somebody who's grieving for something? How do you hear somebody out when they are expressing something that is painful? And the Zoom call thing is interesting because there are certain like social etiquettes that you have on like video conferences that are slightly different from when you're meeting somebody face to face, especially if there's multiple people on a call. You're kind of all muted. Everyone's just staring at a screen. So a lot of people have been saying like, oh, I feel so much more listened to over a video conference call, just because I feel like people are silent and then they're just looking at me, and so I feel like I've got the attention of everybody. Yeah. And it feels nice to know that like everyone's listening to the things that I'm saying and the things that I'm sharing. So I think there's a little bit of validation and affirmation in that, and that's really been helping our group process through things over the last week or so.
Yeah, and that's good, because I don't know if I felt the exact same way, because I think with everyone muted, it's like I sometimes will ask students as I'm teaching my classes over Zoom, and it's like, all right, how was your weekend? How was your day? What's going on today? Tell me a highlight this week, and they just go,
yeah.
And I'm like, unmute yourself and respond, right? So there's actually, if you talk about there's just a difference of social interactions, like there's kind of been almost a learning curve of like, how do we communicate in a group over Zoom online, where I can't just simply stare at a screen and make it look like I'm paying attention, which I don't know if you actually are, but sure, I don't know, but we'll see. To actually, okay, how do we actually interact with each other? Because it is very different when you're not sitting down face to face.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so that's kind of one way that you address this as a youth pastor is continuing the small groups, right? Continue relationships, right? I think that's one thing.
Yes.
Now one thing that I shared, and I think it'd be cool to share here again and kind of hear your thoughts on this as well, is, we're practicing social distancing, but the issue that we dealt with is that in our culture beforehand, I don't remember who wrote the book, but the book came out, Alone Together, right? And so that because of technology, because of screens, because of our distractions, we are physically together, but we're actually alone, right? And that we have one of the loneliest generations that of our time right now, right? And there's actually a new song that just came out, I think by Echo Smith, called Lonely Generation. It's a very interesting song talking about this lonely generation that we're living in. We just have a pixelated version of ourselves. Everything's online. We have surface level friendships, surface level relationships, and we're not able to actually go deep with others. And I thought, and I shared with my students and trying to encourage them of like, we had this problem before where we were together physically, but actually relationally and emotionally alone. And now we're adding social distancing into that, where now we're physically separated, and and we were already emotionally separated, relationally separated. We have to do something to where now, even though we're physically separated, we have to come together in a relational way. And it sounds like one way you're doing that is kind of continuing small groups and having that intentional time for prayer with each other. Are there other ways as a youth pastor that you're kind of helping them bridge this understanding of continuing those very necessary, important relationships?
Well, I think it's definitely hard. And I think it's okay to say that, like, that's a big struggle. Again, a lot of the youth pastor networks that I'm a part of, a lot of us are struggling with that. It's like, how do we know that we're connected with them, even though, how do we know that we're connected with them, even though we are trying to do these video calls and different things like that? But it's interesting because I feel like that's always been the question, because we see our students once or twice a week physically, at least as youth pastors do, in terms of like maybe a midweek Bible study at church, and then we have our Sunday gatherings that we're together, and then the rest of the week it's like we're just following up with texts or phone calls, maybe taking students out for coffee or something like that. But in a weird way, I feel like some youth pastors are able to be with able to see their students more often because of the convenience of the Zoom call.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, some people I feel like are able to use this as an opportunity to bridge that gap of like the whole alone together conundrum, because at this point we can't physically actually be together. But if we're on a video call together, at least in terms of like the pixelation stuff, like we're bridging the gap there and we are connected to each other.
Yeah.
So I think, interestingly enough, I think it depends on perspective, and it depends on like the groups that you are a part of and sort of the culture of your particular group. I would say for us, because we're a commuter church, so we have people that are really from all over, because again, we're a Korean American church. And so we have certain people that live within the community, but I would say about 60% of our church actually drives 30 minutes or more to get to our physical church.
Wow.
And so our midweek Bible studies is about 30% of our entire youth group. Just because of the distance and Friday traffic and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So now we're at a place where we're having these Zoom calls, and we're having a lot more students because it's just more convenient to hop on a Zoom call. So in a weird way, we're actually connecting with more students, and the students are connecting with each other in a, I guess, more communal fashion. So I think that's one small upside to this, is that we're able to do that. And then again, because it is all conversation based, you can't just physically do things next to each other. Like you can't play basketball next to each other and just kind of focus on that. It is all conversation based. It is all checking up on each other, finding out, what each other has been up to, seeing their home environment, even if it's in just a little square box like this, and then just noticing things about the environment that they're in and being able to ask questions about that kind of stuff. So I think there's definitely an upside to this, just with regards to the fact that people want to connect, and you're missing that physical connection. You're missing the ability to be together in the same physical space. And so I think that's drawing up a sense of wanting to connect that maybe wasn't there a week ago or even 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I think it's only going to increase. So we, again, have lots and lots of opportunities. And I think I'm hoping to get to the point where I mean, again, we don't know how long this is going to last, but that people would actually start to request more and more of these types of meetings. Like that was really fun last night. Do you think we could do another one in the morning?
Yeah.
Just to have spaces for people to connect.
Yeah.
And then the idea is when we're able to physically return back together in a particular space, it's like, well, we've been in an environment where like every 2 or 3 days, our students have been connecting with each other in some way, shape, or form versus every 3 or 4 or 5 days even, or some of our students who can only come like once a week on a Sunday, their connection points are very, very limited, versus, again, being able to connect every other day or every 3 days.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely some opportunity.
Yeah, and I think there's a few things you said there I want to kind of touch on in different ways and kind of get your thoughts. One thing I think is just so valuable is, again, the church being that place that's supposed to be that deep, intimate community, right, where the people we're accountable with and holding us accountable and we're holding them accountable. And one thing that I think is so beneficial during this time is what you just said, is that we're starting to connect more. And I've seen this with a lot of people of wanting to be participating more and this allowing us to build deeper relationships. And it's one thing I've seen at my church and that I love about my church is we actually have a text thread with everyone in the church in the same thread. And what this happens, and it's a smaller church, so it works well. It's not overwhelming. But what's been incredible is that this has been happening now for over a year, and to actively be part of everyone's life where you're getting updates almost daily from what's kind of happening and praying for each other. It's so cool then coming back together on a Sunday morning and knowing what was going on in people's lives during the week and having talked to them rather than, oh, hey, I haven't seen you for a week. What's new? And really then being able to take the relationship deeper when you actually see them in person, because you've had these kind of conversations, over Zoom and over texting and those sort of things. I also know that some people are maybe fearful that we're getting used to people are getting used to being able to just do church online and just be able to connect over social media, and that maybe when we can meet physically again, they maybe won't want to. And no, it was easy. Let's just keep meeting online. So how do you kind of deal with that, struggle or maybe that dilemma of I don't know, however that might work out?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's an even broader question to ask too, of like, what am I discovering about what the essentials are in youth ministry, because we can't meet physically anymore? So what can we do? What should we be doing? What are the essentials that even, cause us to come together and say, well, this is what ministry looks like now. But yes, to answer your question first, and then I'll talk about that a little bit. I actually don't fear that much. I don't think that's necessarily a concern for me, because this, I think, is going to end up being an add-on to a lot more ministries. Especially, again, my context is I do have more people that are driving from further distances. And so this is one way that we're going to be able to encourage people to connect even though they can't be with us physically. But, in the end, I think because people miss each other and they are developing more friendships digitally, they're going to want to be in the physical spaces together. That's what I do think is going to happen eventually. And again, depends on how long this is. The one thing I do worry about, though, is the convenience factor of like doing – however, whether your church is doing live worship or sort of some sort of pre-recorded worship, like just the idea that you don't have to get dressed, like go out of the house, like drive somewhere, like all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like I do wonder if that's going to affect us, at some point down the road, depending on how long this takes. But I do think that, again, because on video you can't do a lot of the physical sort of side-by-side activities, that it is more relational, that it will build more sticky relationships, that I think when we are able to meet back physically, I actually think more people are going to be attracted to that in the end. And what's interesting for us, again, too, is we assume that we're going to be coming back together again on like a Wednesday or a Friday or a Sunday. And so the assumption that we're going to come back together again and again and again causes us, I think, to also like take for granted the meetings that we have. But for whatever reason, because we can't do that anymore, these video calls become that much more precious.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that's going to eventually get us to a place where we'll be more happy to meet with each other.
Yeah. And I know that we often are people, it's as soon as like, we want to stay home. And then as soon as people say, hey, you need to stay home, you should not be going outside unless essential, then everyone's going outside. And, I was riding my bike and like everyone was on the trail. Right. And I just think in my perspective, I just assume that, look, we're going to spend this time, we're going to be only chatting with friends over text and phone calls and Zoom and Skype and everything. And we're going to be spending a lot of time online watching YouTube videos. And that when it finally opens up, so to speak, where we can meet physically again, I think that there will be a drive to reconnect, right? And to be those things. Because I think a lot of times where we meet on Zoom, it's like, hey, this is nice, but it'd be fun to just hang out with you, right? And those
Right.
that's often kind of the issue that comes up. Now,
Yeah.
you mentioned also that you're not just simply doing activities with the students, hey, play basketball or something, where you're doing something side by side, but when you're having these meetings, you're actually having discussion and conversation. And I know that's something that I really appreciated about your ministry and how you kind of handle things, is that not only you, but your leaders have been really trained well on how to have good,
Mhm.
productive, deep conversations and discussions with students. I think that most people I kind of run into is if you put them in a small group and say, okay, lead the small group. It's like, well, what do I ask? Right. And you give them some questions, they ask the 4 questions and then they're out. Whereas I find that
Right.
like
Right.
at your youth ministry, and I've been involved everything from 3rd grade all the way to 12th grade.
Yeah.
I've done camps for Kevin, and at all levels, every single level, you break the kids up in a small group and the kids know how to discuss, your leaders know how to ask those really pointed questions. And so are there a few kind of tips that you can maybe give to youth pastors and leaders who are out there, but even maybe parents who are trying to have conversation with their own kids? How do you go about asking deep pointed questions that really drive to the heart of what students are going through?
Students will share when they know that you're a safe place. So, more than asking questions, actually, I think learning how to be a listener is probably number one. Listening well, like the physical things like the eye contact, being interested, responding to the things that they're actually talking about. Those are going to be the number one tips in terms of like how to lead a small group, which doesn't seem like, or asking good questions is like, are you a person that can really pay attention and focus and listen to somebody? That's like key. That's like number one. And then I would say in terms of like, how do you ask questions? How do you ask good questions? Again, getting to the heart of that particular student, not just looking for information, but thinking through what their emotional state is, thinking through where they are spiritually. So, for example, when we're asking small group questions about what's been going on with their lives, it's not just how are you doing this week? Have you been doing your devotional? But really asking them the question that causes them to think a little bit deeper about their own feelings, their own emotions, the things that they've been scared of, the things that they've been thinking through, like really helping them process through their life. And aiming for that and having that be the goal. Like if the goal of your small group is simply to have the answers for the questions that you're asking, then I think it's easy to just go, okay, here's question 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, I'll see you guys next week. But if the goal is to build and develop relationships, then it's okay that we don't ask all 4 questions. Maybe we just get stuck on question number 1, but we're actually learning to get to know one another. And the students are learning how to trust you as a leader. I think that's the big win ultimately in the end. And that's the aim and that's the goal. And that's what we're hoping to get across to our students, that we want to be there to have a relationship with them. We want to let them know that we care for them. So the end goal of the questions is not just here's information transfer, but it really is a sort of discipleship with regards to how can we help you see that we're invested in you. We want to see you grow and we deeply care about you.
Yeah. But I think that's so good, because I often ask students of like, how many people are you, how many close friends do you have? And I think that they often shoot that number way higher than what it really is. Because, here's how many people I'm friends with on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever. Here's how many people follow me. And I think a lot of our relationships are just information transfer relationships, right? I'm a close friend and I know what they like, and I maybe know what their favorite food is, and I know that they played this video game, and I know some details about them. But there's a deeper level to that, right? And I think we often ask the questions like, hey, what was a highlight for your week? And those are good questions. There's nothing wrong with that. But I like how you mentioned like the question, what are you scared of? Right?
Mm.
I mean, questions like what drives you? What are you
Yeah.
afraid of? What are the goals that these sort of questions, I think, get at a deeper level of not only emotion, but also of personality and really what's going on in the student's life than simply, hey, what was a highlight? What was fun? What was not fun? Which again are not bad questions, but they really go much deeper into the things that they're dealing with and the issues and maybe anxieties and fears that they have.
Yeah. And if you think about the emotional development of a human being and where sort of junior high students are and where high school students are, they're really beginning to process through their own emotions. And so when you're invested in that chaos that exists inside of their heart and mind, they are far more willing to be like, okay, this person's ready for my crazy. Here it is, and they'll just give it. And like that's how you earn their trust, is like to receive that and be like, you know what? It's okay that you're going through all of this stuff right now, but I care for you. I love you. I'm here for you. And that's just the simplest way. It's not the easiest way, but
Yeah.
it is a simple way for us to mirror Christ's heart for us too, because adults don't have it all together. We have all sorts of things that we're thinking through. We have all sorts of fears and anxieties and stuff. We're just, better at cleaning it up and presenting it. But truth be told, when we're in a place where we really need Jesus, we just got to learn how to process it with him. And so we want to be that safe place for students.
Yeah, that's good. So you mentioned the different kind of ages. I think it's important. I want to come back to that because I know you're a father of young kids.
Yes.
And then how do you do this at a younger age with younger kids who, hey, their disappointments. If we talk about that spectrum, before, it's very, very small. Maybe what they're actually missing out on. But man, it maybe even feels bigger and greater to them than others, as well as kind of junior high and high school. But also, maybe starting with is that you mentioned, with the adults, I think in order to have these conversations, in order to just open ourselves up to really hearing what students have to say, I think sometimes it strikes fear in maybe some adults of, one, what if they say something that I don't like? Or two,
Yeah.
what if they ask questions that I don't know how to respond to? So maybe what would you say first to the adults who are wanting to dig deep into conversation with students and really get to the heart of what's going on, but either one, don't think that they have answers, or two, man, if my student tells me that they're doing this or they're doing that, or they think this or they think that, I'll just get upset. And how could you think that? How could you do that? No, I've taught you better. I don't know. How would you first kind of come along the adults in helping them deal with these conversations?
Yeah. Again, I think listening. By the time they get to junior high and high school, the best way for you to shepherd their heart is to be a place and to be a person who is willing to listen, and that requires a lot of patience on our behalf for sure. I think when your children are a lot younger, it's easier for you to be in that sort of mentoring role where you are teaching them. But once they get to that junior high and high school age and they want that independence, we have to begin to make that transition over into being a place and again a person that's open to hearing. And open to listening, having a lot of patience, guiding them in a different way through utilizing questions rather than. It's almost like Greg Koukl's book Tactics.
Yeah.
I actually think that that's not just good for apologetics conversations, but I actually really think it's good for parenting conversations as well.
I tell people that's even good for business conversations. Just anytime you're ever in conversations where you're trying to present someone something and they're asking, when you're in that conversation, that book is one of the greatest books that you can read. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's helpful for driving the conversation deeper.
Yeah.
Because you're getting to the root of particular things and you're interested in their answer. And so it's actually a great way to begin to develop just that heart of like helping people to see that you want to listen to them. Yeah. And you're not just trying to argue, and you're not just trying to lecture, and you're not just trying to get them to see things from your perspective, but that you're interested in their perspective. You want to know what makes them tick. You want to know what it is that they're really feeling. And again, getting to the emotions of stuff with teenagers is especially crucial because they have so many and they're willing to sort it out if somebody's willing to listen. That's why they love talking to each other so much, because they feel like those are safe places for them to share. Yeah. And as adults, we want to provide them with wisdom, but we have to be that safe place first and foremost.
And do students, I'm just curious if you talk to students and if any have kind of shared with you of like, how many adults do they feel like are listening to them, do understand them, are taking that time to really know what's going on in their life? Because I know there's studies that show that like most students don't have adult mentors.
Yeah.
And is it because adults aren't trying? Is it because students don't feel like adults are there? Like, is there a disconnect somewhere? Is it something that students want? Do they just not know it, or they desire it and they just wish it was there?
I think a lot of them want it to be there, but they don't know that they want it to be there. Like, because I think our culture spends a lot of times convincing kids that they don't need adults around,
Yeah.
that their lives are better when the adults aren't around. I think I've shared this with your group at Chapel. Like, the Disney Corporation has done a great job of creating movies where it's clearly more fun when parents aren't around. So
Yeah.
all the moms are dead, all the dads are dead of all the Disney princesses and characters, and it's just that's how we get rid of these boring characters, and that's how you can really live your life.
Yeah.
That seeps into us in very, very subtle ways. But at the same time, we long for that wisdom. We long for that sort of mentoring relationships. I think that's why by the time you get to college, usually, like, that is a really, really primal need, I think, for a lot of college students. And they feel that more so than, let's say, junior high and high school students, for sure.
Yeah. And I know that, like, Jeff Myers at Summit Ministries, he gives a talk titled something to the effect of, like, you need old people. And I had him on the podcast years ago, and we're in email conversations now to have him come back on again.
Nice.
But yeah, like, you need old people, and why old people need you. And I remember, and I actually just gave this encouragement to my students this last week of one of the best pieces of advice I got in a young person, or when I was young, was reach out to people who are older than you and learn from them. In fact, a pastor said something to the effect when I was in high school or college, he stopped his sermon. I mean, it was part of his sermon, but he kind of stopped and said, all you young people in here, college students and below, look around you. Find someone who's old sitting near you, and when the service ends, walk up to them and say, "Can I have lunch with you?" And then just talk to them, ask them questions, and learn from them and grow. And this, brings life to older people, and this gives wisdom and encouragement to younger people. And I think it's so valuable that we don't have. And so that was one encouragement to my students, is like, you need this. In fact, another thing is that we just finished in my doctrine class, I just tested on it today, was the chapter on if Christianity is true, why do people walk away? And one of the things that the book shared was that one of the biggest factors in young people remaining in the church through their college years was having an adult mentor. It's not how many times they did their devotions. It's not how often they attended youth group. It's not even if they're born and raised in a Christian family. It was if they had an adult, older mentor, they were more likely to stay in the church than those who did not. That was the number one factor.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because of the intergenerational portion.
Yeah.
Like, you feel like you're a part of the church. Because I think it's so, again, I'm coming from an immigrant church context, like the main sanctuary, like what we consider like the main congregation and the main building that the adults are worshiping in, our students and our children are barely never in there. Right? It's almost like, even just from a physical perspective, they're not a part of the church. They all have their own little rooms on the side.
Yeah.
And so when you have adults that are willing to step into the lives of students, it creates that bridge, and it helps them to see that they're an essential part of the body. Yeah. They're an essential part of the church. That's what keeps them hanging on in the long run.
Yeah. So maybe asking you a controversial question then, what are your thoughts on when churches create completely separate youth services, not just youth service on Friday night, which I think is awesome, but even like on Sunday morning to try to entertain and try to help. Hey, more students are connected because they have their own service, but it's 100% completely separate their own worship, their own sermon, everything on Sunday morning from the main congregation. Are there benefits or negatives to that? What would you say?
Yeah. Well, so again, for us, that's a must. We have to do it that way because of language and culture barriers. So the adult congregation, for us, they're worshiping in the Korean language. And a lot of our second generation immigrant students, they're actually not able to speak Korean that well or able to worship that well. Yeah. So it's not their language. So we have a practical reason we have to do that, and it's because of language. Yeah. But at the same time, the criticism that's levied against that sort of system, we do see. Right? Because you have this idea that like my church experience is just me plus like one grade above and one grade below or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's what my understanding of the church family is. And so that leads to situations when, let's say, 2 years ago, we had to combine our junior high and high school ministries. And it was hard. The junior hires and the high school students, they're really not that far apart from each other in a lot of ways. They really didn't like being with one another. And it was like, well, this is a love issue.
Yeah.
We need to disciple our students to see that the church is not just designed for you to have your comfortable space. The church is designed for people of all ages, of all sizes, shapes, and colors to be able to combine together because it's really about Jesus first and foremost. So that became a discipleship issue. And so we have actually stuck together. We've decided to, for that reason, actually stay together as junior high and high school. And that's been something that, again, has created a lot of opportunities for us to teach a little bit more about what church actually is. But at the same time, again, for practical reasons, we can't. Again, but that's a language thing for us.
Yeah.
But I will say, though, again, it depends on like why you're doing it. Like, are you doing it simply because you feel like every group needs to be isolated and it's a level of learning thing? I think that the justifications for this really matter in the end, because the medium is the message. How you're presenting the gospel to junior hires, how you're presenting it to high schoolers, that's different from, let's say, college students or and above. That does make a difference in terms of how you're training them as disciples.
Yeah.
So if the whole point is, well, we just want to provide you with a comfortable space where everyone's like you, everyone knows the same things that you do, and we just want to make sure that church is a place where you just feel comfortable, then I think it's going to be hard when stuff like this happens to be like, well, it turns out that life is really difficult and you still need to have faith in Jesus even though it's hard. It's like, well, but the form in which I've been discipled has been all about my comfort and has been all about me being served by everyone else.
Interesting. Versus
the other way around. And so in the long run, I think we have to think through these questions pretty well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And even just, the place is not necessarily the place for entertainment. Not that it should be boring,
right,
but it's not for entertainment, right? The purpose of the church is to be part of the body of Christ and to participate in the kingdom purpose and kingdom work that God has called us to. And that's being part of community, intergenerational community, and working together and serving and using the gifts and the talents that God has given us to serve, not to simply just sit back and be entertained.
Yeah.
So I want to come back because I mentioned this, and now there's a few more questions that came up and just thoughts as we're just talking through these things. But I kind of go back to the different ages. So as a parent, your children, I forget exactly how old, but they're younger children. How do you, as a parent, have conversations with your kids as they're dealing with some of the disappointments that they're going through of not being able to hang out with friends, and maybe I don't know if they're a part of any sports or clubs or dance or anything like that, and just not be able to go to school. How are you as a parent dealing with those sort of kind of disappointments at your kids' ages?
Yeah, so I have a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old. So preschooler, kindergartner, and second grader, and it's been relatively easy so far. There have been a few kind of breakdowns and disappointments, and it does have to do with them wanting to be at school. They love their school. Our kids go to a classical academy, and our teachers this past week have been able to do Zoom calls. That's the highlight of the day.
Yeah.
Our internet actually went out yesterday, and our daughter is in the middle of my daughter's Zoom call, and she's the kindergartner, and she was devastated that like she couldn't have the extra 30 minutes that she wanted to really connect. So that's been really hard. But one of the things that we've been doing is we've been talking to our kids about how this is actually an opportunity for us as a family, that one of the reasons why we have to do this, and one of the upsides to this, is that God wants us to be together as a family. God wants us to focus on Him. God wants us to do and do our devotionals together in a little bit more regular fashion. My wife Tracy started a gratitude journal for our kids, and so we've really been focusing in on that, helping our helping our children to be thankful every single day. And it's been cool. Like the things that they've been writing are like really simple things, but the goal for us is that, when this is all said and done, I want our children to be able to look back on this time fondly, because of what they've been able to receive from family versus the things that they've had to miss out on. And so that's the way in which we've been talking to our kids, is we've been constantly reminding them of the things that we should be grateful for, the things that we should be thankful for. And we've been telling them too, like, it's okay to miss your friends. Like, doesn't it make meeting them seem so much better? Like 2 weeks ago, you guys were complaining about waking up in the morning to go to school, and now you're in a place where you miss them. And I'm like, that's God showing us and teaching us that maybe we have taken too many good things for granted. And now we have an opportunity to repent of that, and to come before the Lord and be thankful, so that when we have an opportunity to go back to school, we would rejoice at the fact that we get to have physical meetings together. We get to be at this school together.
Yeah.
We get to learn in a classroom environment together. Again, stuff we take for granted or stuff that we dreaded 3 weeks ago. Now it's like we miss that stuff, and that's what we want.
Yeah.
So for the little ones anyway, that's been our strategy, is to focus on what can we be thankful for.
Yeah. And I think that's so good because, I mean, I think that's a huge benefit. And I've been hearing this from different families of just the increased time, right, that they're able to spend with their kids. And I think that's one thing that our culture has just become so busy, so distracted, right? It normally, it's kind of a joke, but it's also true of like, it used to be, maybe even still, I don't know. It's like when you ask someone, how you doing? The first response is like, busy. It's just, we're just always so busy. And now it's like, man, there's still stuff going on, but man, it really causes you and forces you maybe to take a break. And, this idea of taking a Sabbath and rest and actually take some downtime with family. I grew up in a denomination of Christianity where we really took that part seriously of taking downtime with family once a week. And I really do appreciated it, right? Some of the rules of what the things we couldn't do or kind of seemed crazy as a kid, but I really look back and recognize the benefit of spending that time with family and how beautiful and precious that was. And so hopefully that's encouraging to kind of hear it from that perspective on dealing with those disappointments with the young ones. So when it comes to like maybe junior high and high school, do you address those students differently?
Right now we are, because we have an opportunity because of the video call situation. The first sort of big youth group one that we did together, we had 66 students on the call. And it's not like they can all communicate with each other. So we use the breakout room features in Zoom to, get them into small groups and stuff. But it's very difficult to do anything as a large group. So we quickly pivoted away from that. And we've been trying to target the students kind of in pairs, like the 7th and 8th graders, the 9th and 10th graders, and the 11th and 12th graders. That strategy has been working a little better for us, just with regards to, again, being able to connect. Our meetings at church, they would always be combined. And so there wasn't really an opportunity for us to do that separately. But again, because of the flexibility of the Zoom call, this is one of the upsides to this. We can target them. And they have been really grateful for that. So for now, anyway, our strategy is pivoted to smaller groups, only because the nature of video conferencing kind of requires that, just because of the chaos of everything. So it was crazy. We did 66 students, and then we took a break. But during the break, I was like, I'm just going to go ahead and unmute everyone's mic. And we did a 3-minute break. I was like, go use the restroom, grab a drink of water or something. But everyone stayed because they were just fascinated by the fact that you could hear 66 people trying to say hi. In a Zoom call, the window doesn't even get big enough to fit all 66 people in gallery view. You can only have like 20-something.
25,
you have pages. You have pages that you have to go through. And like they were like saying hi to each other. Like everyone was doing that. It was crazy.
Yeah.
It was fun. But again, you can't do the entire call that way. So we did that for 3 minutes, and then we muted everybody. And then we did different activities in the breakout groups. So it's like we were together, and it was good for everyone to know that we were like physically online at the same time, but there's no like big group thing that you can do. So that's definitely one limitation of doing video conferencing.
Good. A question just came in, so I'll put it up here. The question there is at the top. Sarah has a 4-year-old, started teaching her daughter a little, but would like to ask you about tips you have for teaching really young kids about Christianity. And so just to kind of jump in here really quick before you jump in, is I had an interview set up with Natasha Crane, who's written a wonderful series of books, talking with your kids about God, talking 40 conversations you need to have with your kids about God, and then her newest one, talking with your kids about Jesus. I think the book is around here somewhere.
I know, I have it somewhere too.
I don't know where I put it. Anyway, it's probably on my table outside. But that interview had to be postponed because the week we were supposed to do it is the same week that all the schools were canceled. Kids were back at home. And she said, hey, I have to try to figure out how to do online school with my kids. And so that's been postponed. We're still finding a date. There it is. So just so you know, that is a future interview. Hopefully that's coming up as I try to get that rescheduled with Natasha Crane as things settle down here. But Kevin, what would you say, some tips for teaching really young kids about Christianity?
Nice plug. That was really smooth. Honestly, the number one thing for our kids when they're that young is catechism. We have a yellow, tiny little yellow booklet. I'll send Ryan the link, and I don't know if he can edit the YouTube thing so he
You
can
know,
put it at the
I'm
bottom.
gonna do something fancy here really quick. I'm gonna switch the video over
Oh,
just to you, and I'm gonna run, and I'm gonna grab a book that I have
oh,
and that
okay,
I've used as well.
okay,
So you can answer, but I don't even know if this
yes.
is professional if I'm gonna miss part of this, but it'll be worth it, I think.
It's recorded,
Yeah,
so you can listen to it
yeah.
later.
There you go. All right, here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think catechism is the best way because a children's catechism, a really, really simple kids' catechism, they're just memorizing stuff. And they're at the age where they can absorb information. They may not be able to understand all the nuances of what they're talking about. However, you're beginning to give them language. And as they develop and as they get older, those things will start to click. They'll actually begin to make connections. And so we would teach our children and go through the catechism, very, very simple questions, who made you, right? And the answer to that is God. And then later on, maybe a year later, they would be learning something at children's Sunday school. And somebody would ask them that question. We're reading through the story of Genesis, and, it says that God did this and God did that. And then they would throw out a question of like, who made you? And, obviously all the kids would answer, oh, God made us. And then they would say, why did God make you? And so for a lot of kids, that's a harder question to answer. But because the catechism provides that as the second question after who made you, why did God make you, for God's glory. And so my children would raise their hand. A couple other kids whose parents are also doing catechism would raise their hand, and they would answer for God's glory. Did they understand exactly what that meant at the time? They don't, but they knew that they had the ability to answer that question. And so now my kids are, again, 8, 6, and 3. 3-year-old is still getting used to answering the questions, but for my 6 and 8-year-old, I mean, they're at a place where they can really begin to have conversations about what the answers to these catechism questions mean. What does it mean that we live for God's glory? What does it mean that we reflect God's glory? What does it mean to be made in the image of God? What does it mean that we as human beings are ambassadors for God, that we reflect the person of Jesus? And so they're beginning to ask those questions now when we go through the catechism with them. So I think going through the catechism with young children is super, super important. It also, as a parent, helps you to feel like you're making progress. I think as parents, there's lots of things that we start with our children that are very hard to finish. Personality-wise, like I'm somebody who likes to start things. I love starting things. I'm not that great of a finisher. But catechism, again, is a system of questions. And so you're making progress as you go from question 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And it feels good as a parent to be able to go through that. You may not be able to do catechism questions every night. Maybe you can only do it once a week or twice a week. And that's like the schedule, and that's the shape of your particular family's life. But as you go from question 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, you're going to feel like you're making traction. It may be slow, and it may not feel like everyone's necessarily having fun. But again, fun is not necessarily the aim of everything that we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's good to be able to set the tone and say, this is really important. We're going to need the answer to these questions someday. And I think that's where catechism is really helpful.
Yeah, that's good. And I did catch most of that. So here's I don't know if this is the one that you use.
Yes. Similar. We have another one, but we do have that one as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Very simple.
So this is the one that I have here in my house, even though I don't have kids, we got it. And I've used it, for example, I was asked to do a chapel, kindergarten through 8th grade chapel. And I was like, my goodness, what do you do from youngest kindergarten to oldest 8th grade? And so what I chose to do is I picked 5 of the catechism questions regarding salvation, because their life verse was about taken out of Isaiah, talking about the thing that Jesus does, kind of pointing to Jesus. And so I talked about the idea of salvation. So for the really young ones, I just went over the 5 catechism questions and kind of did a question and response and made words disappear and made them keep repeating the answer to hopefully get them to at least memorize something, as well as the older kids. Then I went deeper into some of the points, right? So there's more content for the older kids, but at least the younger ones hopefully are memorizing it. And I've also, talked to other people. For example, I had Brett Kunkel on a few weeks ago, and I know his wife, Erin, used catechism type questions at their children's ministry at church, and I remember her sharing a story that, at the end of the year, most kids go to kids church, and it's like, what'd you do today? Oh, I made a picture, and and they can't really remember
Right.
what the lesson was about. They
Right.
invited all the parents to some kind of end of the year or summer celebration or something like that, and they had the kids get up and recite question and answer after answer after answer after answer, showing the parents
That's
what the
cool.
kids had learned, and it was like, wow, how
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely an awesome resource for young
Yeah,
kids.
and if you want some help if parents want help with regards to like online resources, New City Catechism, they have one that's for older kids, and they have one for adults, and then they have one for younger children. They kind of split up the answers into the different levels, and they have videos and songs. Songs are a great way to memorize catechism questions. And songs enable younger children to memorize slightly longer answers because they're all put to music. So there's a lot of different things there that I think could be helpful too.
Good. Wonderful. All right. So we have, maybe about 5 or so minutes left. And so just kind of thinking through, I know you came to my school the last time. So you've come to my school and shared 3 times, right? The talk that you mentioned, you shared about Disney movies was
Yeah.
was the first time,
Yeah,
and it
yeah,
was
yeah.
so good we had you come back and finish it. But you also kind of came back and discussed the topic of anxiety and depression. And so, in our last few minutes, and, I know this is something we could spend an entire hour on, but, for kind of more specifically, maybe focused on those instead of just kind of disappointments, what are ways in which we can really come along people that are anxious? I mean,
Yeah.
I personally know people that are out of work and maybe out of work for the next month. And it's like, how am I going to support my family? How am I going to do this? And really kind of that fearful anxiety that people are in. How do we really come alongside people and love them in that situation?
I think again, listening, being there, allowing them to talk about their frustrations, anxieties, the things that they're worried about, asking them those questions that really help draw it out of them. That's going to be really helpful. But I think for me, the way that I've been walking alongside the people at our church through this pandemic and through all of the things right now is just reassuring them that God is with them and God hears them. Right now, we are walking through a spiritual disciplines series, and I don't think it could have come at a better time because we do need to take time to process through all the things that are going on in our life right now with the Lord specifically. And again, I think this quarantine, this time at home, provides us some reprieve from our schedules to be able to do that. Somebody once said, like, I always knew that, like, Jesus is everything I need. Like, I sing those songs on a Sunday morning. But then when you actually have everything taken away, you don't actually realize how much you need until Jesus is all you have.
Yeah.
And so I think for a lot of people, especially, I mean, we want to help materially. We want to be able to help in terms of meeting people's needs, but in terms of meeting people's spiritual needs is pointing them towards Jesus. The Psalms right now, I think, are probably the best place for people to really be sitting in, reading together. Psalm 13 has been something I've been meditating on because I didn't realize how much anxiety I had until this particular week. Like, I think I'm addicted to control. And when you have no control of a situation like this, it just pulled the rug out from under me. And I was just left thinking, what can I do? Like, I find myself reacting to this situation by coming up with projects to do because I'm an action-oriented person. But there isn't anything to do about this. Like, I can't just don a mask and start going off and helping people deal with this. I mean, even hospitals, they're just trying to keep people alive. It's not like there's a magic pill or there's a vaccine for this. Like, this feels so out of my hands. Yeah. And I'm realizing that I've never really dealt with my anxiety issues and I've never really dealt with my self-control issues. And so coming to the Psalms, reading the Psalms, Psalm 13 in particular this week has been really just ministering to me because it really is just about, God, I don't know where you are in all of this and I don't know what you're doing in all of this. But then at the end, but I'm going to trust you because I trusted you in the past. Yeah. The phrase that I've been using is we have to trust in the dark what we trusted previously in the light. I think that's based off of something C.S. Lewis said.
Yeah.
But the idea is like, no, there were moments in my life previous to this where I knew God was in control. And right now, when it feels so out of control, can I continue to trust that God is in control?
Yeah.
And so learning how to do that and spiritually attaching myself to those truths, the best way for me is to just alongside those saints before who have written in the Psalms those very feelings, and God has put his stamp of his approval on.
Yeah.
Right? Like those things are in the Bible for a reason. It's because God empathizes with us, God sympathizes with us.
Yeah.
And it's one of the ways that he's drawing us to him.
Yeah.
So
that's so good. Man, that's so good. We probably should just stop it there, but I have one more question for you based on what you said.
Yeah.
And just not even on that same topic, but a little bit different. But you mentioned, going through the spiritual disciplines with students. And, I just am curious on how your students respond and maybe encouragements that you can give maybe to other pastors, because, that's very different than entertaining students and doing the very, we often hear you need to give, the things that are, we need to teach them the things that are relevant, right? We have to be relevant, talk about relationships, talk about dating, talk about those things. And again, they do need a biblical perspective of those, but it's not very often that I hear youth pastors saying, we're going through a series on spiritual discipline. So how do you go about that in the beginning? And then how have the students responded to that series?
So it's funny because we started this series before all of this happened. And the students were just like, okay, we know it's important. Like, thanks for giving us ways to connect with God. But then all of a sudden this hits and people are like, I realized I don't know how to shore up my faith. I don't know how to grow in my faith. I don't know what it actually means to trust in God. Like I said, I sing about it. I hear it. I've been taught it. I know that that's what I'm supposed to do, but I don't actually know what to do. Like, how do I actually spend my time to grow my faith? And the idea is we have spiritual disciplines. So when we think of spiritual disciplines, we have a tendency to think about things like fasting, Bible reading, and prayer.
Yeah.
Those are the three top things that we think about. But there's actually a book by a woman named Calhoun. Her last name is Calhoun. It's called The Spiritual Disciplines Handbook. She's a bit more on the charismatic side of things, but I think she has a really awesome list of things that you don't normally think about as spiritual disciplines, but it's practicing things that come from the fruit of the Spirit that allow you basically to do things. Okay, that's a very unclear way of saying this. I should have a better way of saying this, but it's basically taking the fruit of the Spirit, right? The things that the Holy Spirit is already doing in your heart, and then showing you practices to grow those things in you. So, for example, one of the examples is gratitude. So the spiritual discipline of gratitude is actually, there's multiple ways you can practice it, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to do things that bring up gratitude in your heart. Yeah. And so you sit, and one of the things that we're doing is we're sitting, and every day you jot down 10 things that you're thankful for. And by the time you're done writing those 10 things down, you've gone through the process of taking whatever mind and whatever emotional state you were in previously. After you write those 10 things down, you can't help but feel gratitude in your heart. You can also do things where you actually intentionally write letters of gratitude to other people. And again, whatever emotional state you were in before you started writing those letters to those people, by the time you're done writing 2 or 3 letters to people, you feel gratitude in your heart. Like, you're feeling grateful. Like, it actually does something to you to bring out that fruit of the Spirit. And so that's essentially what we're going through. And I'm finding that, God in a weird, strange way has kind of prepared us for this quarantine by granting to us this particular series that we're in. And now we're trying to figure out, how do we hold our people accountable? So I'm doing Zoom calls based off of the spiritual disciplines. And each Zoom call is just a quick hour. I'm covering what the spiritual discipline is, why we should do it, what the benefits are, and then we're going to actually practice it, like whatever it is. So last night we did one on gratitude, so we wrote down 10 things. We shared 2 of those things that we wrote down, and then we just prayed for each other, and that was it. And then later on this week, I'm going to email everyone that was on that call just to ask them, what are your gratitude practices? You need to send me an email back as an accountability for what you've been doing. And we're going to do that, and we're going to go through another 6 or 7 by the time 2 weeks is over, and we have another like 15 or 16 that we're hoping to get through by the time we hit Easter. That's the goal. Yeah,
that's awesome. Wow. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for taking this time. It's always an encouragement to spend time with you guys, and you have a blessing in my life and my students and in my ministry, as well as me being able to participate in yours. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you watching, I hope that this was an encouragement to you. Let me remind you of a couple things before you click away. Next week is going to be my spring break, which means I'm going to be busy with 2 interviews next week. On Tuesday, I'm interviewing Anjanette Roberts from Reasons to Believe. She's a molecular biologist and virologist. We're going to be talking about why did God create viruses? How do we understand viruses? Why do they spread? Why do they mutate? All those kind of questions. And so if you have questions that you about viruses, you can send those in. You can do so on Instagram, on Twitter. You can send those to me. You can also comment in different ways, or follow and watch that discussion live. It'll be posted here soon in the upcoming videos, as well as on Thursday. I'm going to be talking to John Noyes from Stand to Reason on his topic of suicide. And so really dealing with a difficult thing there that really is affecting a lot of students. And so you can subscribe, stay up to date with all the videos and interviews, 2 of them that are coming up next week, as well as send in those questions and interact. So guys, thank you so much for watching. I pray this is an encouragement and a blessing to you this week. Pray that you continue to go out, build those deep relationships, communicate, and really come alongside those that are hurting and truly share the love of Christ with them, and be that the person that Christ has called us to be in this culture. So thank you so much for watching and participating. Have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend, and God bless you guys.